Hey y'all, welcome to the podcast A Day with Dre, featuring Dre, your host, me, Leandre Kennedy. It's been a little while since I've done one of these. I think it was March of 2021 where we left off when I thought we were coming out of that pandemic. Little did I know we were still in the middle of it, but we're kind of coming back with something new today, a fresh start, if you will. That hiatus that I took, well, there was a lot of life happening. Let's see. I finished graduate school, became a doctor, moved to Illinois. So I'm in an entirely different place than I was back then. Better than ever? We'll see. That's kind of what we're talking about. So we'll be talking about me, you, and everything else in between, and what's been going on during this hiatus. So let's get to it. But before we get carried away into conversation, remember, make sure you subscribe. You can find me anywhere, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. There's also going to be video included on YouTube. I'm going to try to do this weekly, so hopefully we can get this thing going pretty consistently. So remember, A Day with Dre podcasts. You can also find me on any social media. My social media handles are typically just my first and last name. But the podcast, again, is A Day with Dre. All right, let's get to it. So, I'm sitting here on Friday, October 11th. Also, happy birthday to my older brother, Carlos. Big 33 today. Man, we're getting old. You know, last time we talked, I was in my late 20s. Now I'm 30. Time is just flying. But it is October. The days are getting shorter. The weather's getting cooler. It is football season. We're getting in the thick of things. My football team started out looking good, but dropped the last two in a row, as you can see by my flag here. Or excuse me, my towel. I'm a Steelers fan. But the hometown team, the Minnesota Vikings, they're looking like the real deal. So although I'm a Steelers fan and not a Vikings fan, it is nice to see people from home actually happy about sports for once. The Vikings look all right. Timberwolves, they traded Cat, but we'll see. We'll see how things go. But anyways, the weather's getting colder. The days are getting shorter. And that little thing called seasonal depression starts to creep up on people. And in my conversations with people, it's made me wonder, is it seasonal depression or are people just straight up depressed? Depression and anxiety, words that we're constantly hearing thrown around, but what do these things actually mean? Okay, so what depression is depression's a mental health condition that involves a persistent low mood and a loss of interest in activities. So what does that exactly mean? Does it mean you're sad? No, not necessarily. Depression means your baseline is lower. Okay? So I think people get sadness and depression confused, whereas sadness can definitely be intertwined with depression, sadness, grief, etc. And the other term that's used a lot that's not correctly used all the time is anxiety. And what anxiety is, it's a emotion that can, it's a feeling or emotion that has feelings of dread, fear, uneasiness. Often it comes when you're waiting on something, you're anticipating some type of future threat. It's a completely normal and healthy reaction to stressful situations. So that's one thing that we got to get straightened out. Things like taking a test, things like, proposing, things like going into a job interview, etc. You're supposed to be anxious when these things are happening. These are big things that are happening. So when people think that they're never supposed to be anxious, well, that's just incorrect. Where people start to have issues is when you have an anxiety disorder. That's when that anxiety is excessive, intense, and doesn't go away. And sometimes it's there in situations that it just absolutely doesn't need to be there for. So we're kind of going to talk about both of these things and how they're intertwined with the days getting shorter. For a lot of people, for some people, they just deal with these things, anxiety and depression, all the time. These two things are often wrapped up with each other, but you certainly can have one without the other. All right. So when talking about depression or anxiety, I asked people on Instagram to, let me know something about their mental health that they wish other people understood about them. And we really had a split right down the middle where there was a group of people that kept talking about things related to their anxiety and people that kept talking about things related to depression. And it was almost a gender split as well. Males tend to talk about the depression, whereas the females, or men and women, excuse me, the men talked about the depression, the women talked about the anxiety. And the responses from anxiety based thoughts were that they wish people understood that you can be completely normal appearing on the outside. You're going about your day, you're smiling, you're laughing, you're interacting with everybody, but your anxiety is crushing you inside and you can't get away from it even when you go home. It still eats away at you. It makes it hard to go to work the next day. You have to sit in your car and calm down after work, before work, etc. And this is a regular activity for other people, but for this individual person, their anxiety is keeping them from being able to do normal things like go to work. They claim they don't have a reason to be so anxious about work, but for some reason, work is giving them panic attacks or anxiety attacks, where they're sitting in the car doing breathing exercises, etc. And this is an example of an anxiety disorder, because unless your job is actually causing, putting the fear of God in you, doing something to trigger you, there's no reason to feel like that about work. So I would ask that person to reflect on their job. Did anything happen at their job that makes them afraid to go to work? Or is it more of a social anxiety where just the presence of people and being around people makes you feel that way? Because there are social anxieties that do that. Some people just cannot function around groups of people. I think what would be funny about this anxiety would be if this person, and not to make light of their situation, if they said they just worked from home and opening up their computer, just the social interaction with people on the computer gave them anxiety to the point of hyperventilation, would be pretty interesting. Not funny, but different. So that's an example of anxiety, or something that's completely normal for most people that is shutting somebody down. Other forms of anxiety that people talked about were going out in public. I think the COVID-19 pandemic really messed up a lot of people's social skills, because people don't know how to interact with each other as well as they used to. People seem to prefer to, they'll see someone and instead of talking to them, they'll send a text and say, I saw you, but you didn't see me, etc., instead of just going up to someone and talking to them. I think this is more of a product of people, myself included, people my age, growing up with the internet being as big of a deal as it is. Whereas at least at 30, I think I still had enough of my childhood where we had to talk to each other and play outside together without constantly having a phone in our face. But, when you live your whole life where you can easily get a hold of someone, you don't have to see them face to face, it's a lot easier to develop a type of anxiety when it comes to dealing with people face to face. The men, on the other hand, where I said the women that responded tended to talk about anxiety, where the men focused on depression, the women were giving these well thought out, very open statements about how they battle with their anxiety, how these things are really detrimental to their lives. Whereas, I'm going to be honest, the men, and this could just be a reflection of the friends I have and the people I interact with on social media, but our responses were shitty. They were just stupid. Almost every man that responded talked about how they were anxious or depressed, but it was always related to like an ex or something like that. And to that, I say, like, come on. Like, it's, it is Saturday Eve, but there's no reason to always make everything about exes. I know that back in undergrad, that was, the Saturday era and the Saturday era, but I think we can have a serious conversation about being sad without talking about our exes. But since this is the topic, let's get into some of the things that the men said. So I had some responses about how, someone went through a bad breakup and now they just are having a hard time getting out of bed. They're having a hard time going to the gym. They're having a hard time doing the things that they used to do because they're so sad and lonely without that partner that they once were with. And as a person that's never actually had a bad breakup, I can't necessarily relate to that, but I have had depressing things happen to me, although not necessarily romantically. But I do identify with those feelings because I had about myself this calendar year with that. Those of you that know me personally, you know that my dog Jackson passed away in March. So, I have two dogs, Jackson and Joel. Well, my OG, my German Shepherd, he passed away this past March. And for me, that was extremely tough because, like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm 30 years old and Jackson was a little over 13, and I had him his entire life, meaning what made that so tough was I had Jackson since I was a teenager, meaning he went through high school. I had him through undergrad. I had him when I got my master's and when I finished medical school. And he made it almost a year into my residency. So if you think about those steps in life, from being 16 to being damn near 30, those of you that have lived through that, I mean, even if you're older, younger, you can be 22. And from the time you're 16 to the time you're 22, typically you're an entirely different person. So almost all of my core memories that have happened in my, late adolescence and adult life, I was a parent to this dog. When I was playing football or running track in undergrad and always coordinating how I was going to get this dog taken care of when we were on the road and trying to find friends to let him outside when I was, a 10-hour bus ride away for a track meet and all these little things and the transition from being a student athlete to being just, I guess, a regular person on the campus and all these different things that I went through with this dog. And I didn't realize how big of a part of my identity that having this dog actually had become. And it was really hard for me because, especially when I finished with my proper athletic career, I still stay active now, but when I was done being a student athlete and my identity was flipped upside down because I hadn't gotten into professional school, I didn't know where life was taking me, and my identity was gone, and I struggled with that. And there were days where I would just lay in bed and not want to get up to do anything. And that's the definition of what being depressed was. Back then, I would have never admitted that. I would have just been like, man, I just need to get my shit together. But looking back on it, that was clearly depression. I had lost something that was so important to me, which was my sports. I didn't really have a true plan other than go to med school, but I hadn't gotten into med school at that point. And the only thing that really helped me get through that time was the responsibility of having to take care of my dog. And there would be days where I wouldn't eat, or I would eat one time in a day, but I would get up and make sure he was fed, make sure he went for his walk, make sure he did all of these things. So really, he kept me from completely falling apart. And I think that made our bond so strong because the responsibility that I had in him helped me stay active in life. And I think this goes to anybody that's actually dealing with depression out there, is that make sure you have someone or something that is a crutch that keeps you going, because who knows where I would have been if I wouldn't have had that. And I'm not saying that I was going down the self-harm path, but I'm saying you never know. So it's important to, keep your reason why. And mine just happened to be a dog. So we got through those tough times. I ended up moving to Iowa for school, and got another dog when I was down there, and lived happily ever after or whatever. But when this past March, when Jackson passed away, it unlocked a lot of things that I had been kind of suppressing and holding on to that I would have never guessed I had. I mean, I'm going to be honest and transparent. I think when my dog died, I think I might have cried every day for a month straight. Whether that was when I was laying in bed at night, whether it was in my car on my way to work, whether it was even in the bathroom over my lunch break, just the emotions that I had really been neglecting, because if you do know me, I'm not a very emotional person, or at least I wasn't. All of it just came spilling out of control. Couldn't do anything about it. And I stopped working out. I stopped going to the gym. Those are the same thing. I stopped being active. I quit playing my instruments. I was finding it harder and harder to go to work every day. And it wrecked me. It flipped me upside down, and it took months to get out of that. And honestly, today, sometimes I still have my setbacks because I miss my damn dog, because me and that dog went through a lot together. But that's my way that's my depressive story. And I think it's important to be able to come out and talk about that and say that and talk to people about it, because I promise you, more people care about you and want you to do better than you think. And if you don't tell anybody that you're going through something, if they don't know that you're going through something, if your family doesn't know, if your friends don't know, then how can you expect to get better? And this isn't me saying you need a therapist, although I think everybody needs a therapist, whether they're doing great, whether they're doing bad, anywhere in between. It's always good to just talk to somebody. I need to take that advice more myself, because I will, and then I'll stop, and then I'll start, and then I'll stop, and I'll go long periods of time without stopping. But I think if I would have talked to someone about depression, if I would have talked to someone about anxiety, if I would have told someone that my first year of med school, when I knew I got a question wrong on an exam, I would go into this downward spiral and think, okay, well, obviously I'm failing this exam. I'm going to get kicked out of school. I spent all this money on school. My life is over. And that would happen with almost every question that I didn't know. And here I am thinking that's just a normal response, and it was keeping me from being able to finish exams on time sometimes. And obviously, I got through. I didn't have to repeat a year of school or get kicked out of school or anything like that. But it was making things so much harder. And I would be sweating during exams. And I used to be the most comfortable exam taker there was. I didn't even, I think I stayed up all night before my MCAT, and here I am sweating during regular exams. And if I would have just been open and talking to people about these things, maybe I wouldn't have as many gray hairs as I have now at 30 years old. Not that I'm a silver fox, but I do have some gray hairs. And I think just trying to internalize all this stuff all the time really, really mess with my ability to express myself and be vulnerable emotionally. And I'm not sure if that's a me thing, if that's a societal thing, if that's a man thing, or just a human thing. I was raised in a house where my parents weren't very open emotionally, and they definitely didn't want us to be open emotionally, because what could we complain about? And when I say parents, I didn't live in a two-parent household, but my dad, when I was with him, definitely didn't want us to be open emotionally. And not that he shamed it, he would just not be that receptive to it back then. He's much more receptive to that kind of stuff today. But when I was a kid, that shit was a no-go. And my mom was just, I felt like my entire childhood, she was always at work. So it just was what it was. But there are certain things that I just never learned how to do properly that as a 30-year-old, I'm still learning about myself. So I say that to say this: if you need people to talk to, it's worth it. It's 100% worth it. And I think you should do it. And even if you don't want to talk to someone who has a license or something like that to talk to people because you don't think your problems are big enough to talk to a therapist, well, there's no problem too big or too small. And although I'm a physician with a license, I'm not a licensed therapist, but I'll still talk to you, and I'll just tell you this is off the record because I don't want to give you official advice on how to deal with your mental issues. But I certainly will be a listening person. Now, is all of this rise in people being depressed and anxious over things, is this due to the season changing? I don't know. Shorter days are depressing. You can't spend as much time outside. You're not getting that vitamin D. So your brain chemistry is altering. Or maybe you're actually just, your baseline is anxiety disorder or chronic depression. Excuse me. But what I will say is, based on the men versus women responses, the women are much better at understanding and dealing with their own mental health issues, whereas the men are just like, my girl left me, time to hit the gym. Or they'll just be like, let's hit the club, something stupid like that, which I suggest learning ways to heal properly. And this is not me trying to be a pick-me or anything like that. I'll just say that the women were more open and honest with themselves, whereas the men were not so honest with themselves. So maybe we're just in a male mental health epidemic. Maybe it is sad boy fall. I'm not entirely sure. What I will say about the men is that it does seem like there is a rise on men being just overall just lonelier than usual. I saw some crazy tweet about how there's a higher rate of virgin men than there has been in like the last 100 years or something like that. And men are openly and proudly being incels and just crazy stuff like that. So maybe that's playing into the whole sad boy falls because the men are just sad and lonely. And of course, not all men are sad and lonely, but it seems to be the number is rising. And based on the responses I got to my prompt about mental health, the men are lonely because of their exes. So it is Friday, so that, Saturday Eve, I guess. When it comes to mental health, uh, one of the things that I think we need to work on is, although it's good to have a person you can talk to, because just talking about your health and talking about how you're feeling helps you process your emotions and feelings if done properly. Some people, it can just make them worse if you're angry and talking about why you're angry, instead of processing and understanding and dealing with it, you just continue to snowball and get angrier. Some people talk about things and it makes them sadder, but maybe you need to go, you need to reach the peak of that emotion before you can start to come down from it, possibly. But if you let your emotions completely be reliant on another person fixing them, making you feel better, well, that's a recipe for disaster. So, for all those men out there that are depressed because of their ex, while that's completely healthy to be depressed over something that you lost, that you love and care for, make sure that you're doing something healthy to process it. Now, if your depression over an ex is because you did something to make them leave you, and somehow you're making yourself the victim, you're kind of going with like the future mindset, how he just does people dirty, and then every song he's crying for help, low key, because he just is surrounded by people all the time, has access to the most beautiful people, millions of dollars, but still is not loved. Then that's where maybe you just need to talk to a therapist, someone that's a professional that can help you process these feelings. But the first step is understanding that you have these feelings. No one is above or below depression. Millionaires kill themselves. People that have access to all the money and all the women and or material things, physical things, people, etc., still kill themselves because they're depressed. They do crazy shit to get over to try to deal with their depression, and none of it helps because they're trying to mask it, they're trying to cover it up with other things. But sometimes just looking yourself in the mirror and realizing that you have a problem and you're not above this problem and you need to get help dealing with this problem is a good way to actually get over your problem. No matter how many P. Diddy parties, no matter how many bottles of baby oil he goes through, he's still dealing with something that's making him be this sex crazed maniac or something like that. Maybe it's the guilt from possibly being involved in Biggie's and Tupac's murders, allegedly. I don't want anybody to come after me for that. That's why I say allegedly. Maybe it's guilt from other things. They say he's possibly involved in his ex-wife passing away, which would be crazy. I hope to God that's not true, because talk about being the children of that former marriage and finding out that your father had something to do with your wife passing away. But they say ain't no party like a Diddy party, but clearly he was still covering up some type of demons that he had. Or maybe he just literally is a demon. Who knows? That shit is crazy though. Like 1,000 bottles of baby oil. Can you imagine what you would need 1,000 bottles of baby oil for? I had one bottle of baby oil last me like 4.5 years. Diddy was having thousands on standby. That's some sick shit. Like, very sick shit. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just too much of a plain Jane. I can't figure out what I would need all that for. But then again, I'm just normal. If you have anything regarding mental health that you'd want to talk with me about or want me to talk about, I invite you to use my email located in the bio for my podcast. Send me something that you want to chat with me about, and we can get it set up. We can do it virtually or face to face if you're someone more local, and we can have a nice talk about mental health, your mental health, my mental health, the status of mental health in society, why people are dealing with some of the things that they're dealing with, and how do we get better as society. Mental health can be chronically bad in the States because we're living in a place that is self-proclaimed the greatest country in the world, which I think is bullshit, because what is a greatest country in the world? What are the measurables to be the greatest country in the world? Sure, freedom, but we're not the only free country in the world. We're not the healthiest country in the world. We're not the smartest country in the world. We're the country with the most weapons, which honestly plays into the anxiety that people have because everybody is fucking strapped in this place. But everything that could be measurably good, we're not the best at. We have politicians that don't do anything we say, but we keep voting for them anyways, because what other options do we have? We just hope that finally they're going to do what they promised to do. We have either forever wars that we're a part of that we withdraw from terribly, or we have proxy wars that are still kind of doing the same things of the forever war that we withdrew from. And everything costs more. It's impossible to buy a house unless you want to spend way too much money. They're asking crazy amounts of money for used vehicles where it makes it better off to buy a brand new one. Our food sucks unless you want to spend a ton of money to get the food that would be the baseline of acceptable in other countries. So yeah, it makes sense that here in the States, our mental health is not as good as it should be. And you talk to your parents or your grandparents about it, and they'll just say, back in my day when I was a little kid, the minimum wage was $3.75. How dare you ask for $15? Meanwhile, $15 isn't even close enough unless you live in, I don't know where you can live, and $15 would be enough to survive off of. And you say, well, minimum wage is not for survival, but then who is it for? If you think someone that flips burgers should only be paid $10.50 an hour, and you say, well, those jobs are for kids, and kids don't need to survive, they can live off of their parents. Well, that just shows you the kind of background you came from, because there's a lot of people that can't live off of their parents because the parents are struggling too. Because really nowadays there's good jobs and then there's bad jobs. There's not a whole lot of in between. And the parents are already struggling. So if the kid can make $15 an hour to kind of set themselves up for some freedom, that's fine. Also, there are people that aren't kids that need jobs. You need a goddamn master's degree to be a manager at half these places. And an entry-level job should be, if you work full-time on an entry-level job, you should be able to afford at least a one-bedroom apartment in the city or town you're living in. And for most people, the minimum wage where they're at that's not possible. So yeah, of course, our mental health is bad because everybody's struggling to survive. But I digress. We can get into the social political conversation at another time. The United States are certainly not helping people be healthier, both physically or mentally, though. I think you can look across the aisle and it doesn't matter what you believe in, but you can at least agree with that. Me personally, how did I get out of my depressive state? I started talking to people. I started being open. I started talking to professionals. I told myself that it was time to stop being sad. And of course, I was wrong because I'm still sad. I still get sad when I think about what I lost. But I told myself it was okay to feel that way, but I shouldn't let it take over all phases of my life. And that helped me. So maybe just something that simple can also help you. But I think we're in this weird state as people, especially those of us that are chronically online, me included, I'm chronically online, as we see all these people doing all these things, living these lives, thinking everybody's killing it, everybody's happy, but I promise you that half the people you're seeing doing that are just doing it for the gram. They're faking it. They're not what it seems to be. And that's okay because it's social media. You can flaunt and portray whatever you want, but those of you that look at that and say, I should be as happy as them, and it makes you feel worse about yourself, well, just realize that that's probably not the reality. They're not as happy as you think. But as someone that's chronically online, I think the cure and cause of depression for a lot of people, or maybe just me, is Twitter. And Twitter is my own personal pick me up when I'm having a long day, when I'm having a tough day. I go to Twitter, and Twitter always provides what I need whenever I need it. So during every episode from this point on every episode from this point on, I'm going to have this little session where I do tweets that made me laugh, tweets that made me sad, tweets that did something. And the first tweet that made me die laughing, because it involves things I love, it involves black people, it involves history, and it involves conspiracy. And these are things that I just, things that are near and dear to my heart. So Sexy Red holding a Plan B, doing the duck lips. And it's quoted by someone saying, I know Ronald Reagan sent you. And if you don't understand that reference, it's alluding to the idea that Ronald Reagan destroyed black communities by flooding them with drugs, etc. We can talk about that on another time. But the fact that Sexy Red is being compared to COINTELPRO goals is hilarious, and low-key, like, it might be true. It kind of reminds me of that movie They Cloned Tyrone, where there's actually, just go watch it. I'm not even going to get into that movie. Another tweet was regarding the P. Diddy situation and the freak-offs. And it said, I don't think niggas understand how long one bottle of baby oil lasts. And that kind of alludes to like what I was saying about how I had a bottle of baby oil that lasted me like 4 years. And he just says, I can't even comprehend what they was doing. And then someone goes, that shit was called the freak off. It's going to be really hard to imagine how they're outdoing each other. And someone else said, an incalculable amount of sexual assault, which sadly is probably true, but still 1,000 bottles of baby oil on standby is still just so crazy. And another one that I got a nice little laugh out of was, and if you're watching on video, you'll see like the clips of the tweets as well, whereas I'm just kind of narrating them for you. But this girl named Maddie says, he cheated on me with the same girl my other ex cheated on me with. And then at Nick Still Here says, you might need to ask her for some advice. She keeps taking your man. which honestly, he might be onto something with that. If the same girl keeps taking your men, then I look at that and say, you two obviously have some history, and you might have. I don't even want to know what you did to her for her to keep coming after your men. And then Mr. Unchained with the Saturday tweet of the week goes, "I'm glad she's suffering. She ain't choose me." And that kind of fits in with the theme of the men talking about their mental health. Also, with that being said, a week ago today, I think it was a week ago today, might have been the 3rd or something like that, it was National Boyfriend's Day. Those of you that are sad because you didn't get to celebrate National Boyfriend Day, there's always next year. Those of you that are sad that you're still celebrating National Boyfriend Day because you're stuck in that phase, step it up. Maybe next year you'll be better. And those of you that have boyfriends that didn't do anything for National Boyfriend Day, shame on you. It's basically Valentine's Day, but for men. Just kidding, Valentine's Day is also for men. The last thing I'll talk about in terms of funny stuff I saw on Twitter this week was the black food tweet. And Bonita says, "I mean no harm, but I hate the way black people name business." And she goes, "This shit fi as hell bar and grill." And that led to this hilarious thread of black food spot names. So we'll start with the local one here in Illinois called SLE, which stands for Sexy Little Eatery, which is a soul food spot, which I heard is good, and now I definitely need to try it. But then again, I heard it from people that don't normally take in soul food, so I'll just have to find out for myself. My personal favorite, though, is this restaurant I saw that it was in Jacksonville, I believe, and it's called Real Niggas Cooking, because that's what real niggas do. And the picture is just orange juice and wings that look like they're actually fire. 4.7 stars, so they know what they're doing. There's another restaurant, 4.3 stars, called Ooh Wee Just Taste It. Like, come on. But I definitely would go there, just off the strength of the name alone. And then in Montgomery, Alabama, a pizza spot called Can a Brother Get a Slice? So, just black people doing black people shit, but that's okay because only we would do some shit like that. And you know what? It just works. Don't ask me how, don't ask me why, it just works. Yeah, we talked about a bunch of sad stuff today, honestly, so always got to end with a little bit of a pick-me-up. And for me, whether I'm having a good day or a bad day, I know Twitter is going to make me laugh. So I hope those of you that, if you resonate with the feelings that I was talking about, the sad stuff, the anxiety, I hope you find someone or something that helps you feel better about these things. And these days are only going to get shorter. The weather is going to get colder, and it makes those bad feelings feel stronger. So I suggest just reaching out, talking to someone. Reach out to me. I won't be there for you all the time, but I certainly can give you some of the time that I have. I do live a busy life, as we all do, but never too busy to at least talk to someone that's struggling. But with that being said, we're going to wrap this thing up. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for chatting with me. Thank you for sending in your suggestions. Remember, if you have anything that you want to talk about, my email that I take all my requests through is in my bio. Okay. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, whether that's Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, Spotify. That's A Day with Dre podcast. You can find me on any social media, first and last name. My social media is just my name. And we'll try to make this a weekly thing. All right. By the way, if the Steelers beat the Raiders on Sunday, then, maybe we'll talk about some good stuff next week. If they don't, we'll have to do an emergency episode over some things that are making me sad, i.e. Pittsburgh Steelers football. All right. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.